I call to order the February 2025 special meeting of the Special Committee on University Workforce at the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. And sorry to cut the conversation short. Thank you to everyone joining us here in the West Committee room. While today's meeting is not being live streamed, the recording will be uploaded and archived to the board's YouTube channel after today's meeting. Just a quick reminder that the West Committee room has room-wide microphones, so please be sure to project when you speak, and I'll ask those in the audience to please limit side conversations. Thank you so much. Our first item of business is engaging faculty and staff to advance the university's mission. And we have presenters with us, Andrew Oline, Dean of College of Science and Engineering from the Twin Cities campus, and Brandon Sullivan, Senior Director of Talent Strategies, Office of Human Resources. Hi. Welcome, please. So you will hear a system-wide, hear an overview of the system-wide employee engagement and how it advances the university's mission. And really appreciate both of you being here. Please go ahead.
Well, before Senior Director Sullivan starts, I'll just say that, the engagement survey process at the university and action planning around it, we feel has been very successful over the course of the life of this survey, which is now, I believe, 10 plus years. And we're looking forward to the continuing partnership with our colleges, schools, and units across the system to advance this work in the future. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Brandon to start us off. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you. So the goal of this presentation today and discussion is to bring you all up to speed on some of the current efforts to engage faculty and staff at the University of Minnesota. So engagement is a common term. It's used to mean lots of different things, but engagement in the workplace is something that has been studied for many, many decades, and there's a lot of science and research behind it. In fact, we have faculty in our Department of Psychology and School of Business who have contributed to some of this research. So I'll start with a quick overview of what engagement in the workplace is and how it shapes outcomes that are important for us, both as an organization and in terms of our workforce, and talk a little bit about the work that we're doing around engagement here. So to start out, when you are engaged, you care about your work, you care about your colleagues, you care about your organization's success. And research on engagement has identified 3 specific characteristics that we have when we are engaged. And you can see the list of kind of summary of them here. So when we are highly engaged, we're energetic and resilient, dedicated and involved and focused and motivated. And we're willing to put in the time and effort to help our colleagues and our departments and our teams be successful. Now, there's a lot of research that's been done across many different industries on the outcomes of engagement. And this helps explain why so many organizations do work on engagement and why we do it on engagement. And in fact, I'm not aware of any industry that's been studied where engagement isn't important in driving the outcomes that the industry is seeking. So just to give you some examples, in higher education, of course, healthcare, technology, research and development, some industries that are very relevant for us. Engagement has been shown to predict some really important outcomes. And you can see a summary of some of them here. So for example, for us, the student experience is something that the more engaged our faculty and staff are, the better the experience for our students. In a clinical setting, patient care quality, safety outcomes, and other kinds of things are related to the level of engagement of the clinical staff and the faculty who work in those settings. And in settings where you have customers, of course, customer satisfaction is really important, which is why a lot of private sector organizations do a lot of work around engagement. In terms of some of the specific things that I know this committee is particularly interested in around the workforce, engagement is very important in understanding and getting things like retention to a place where we want them to be. Individual performance and productivity is related to level of engagement, as well as kind of the overall quality of the work environment. So when we're engaged, we tend to show up to our colleagues with respect, with a positive attitude. We want to be helpful. When we're disengaged, we may show up in the opposite, right? And so engagement also affects sort of the overall climate within the organization and how people experience it. And it's these connections to engagement that really drive the importance of looking at engagement. So in terms of what creates engagement, I'll go into a little more detail in a few minutes. But to give you a little bit of the big picture, there are 3 buckets of things that really drive engagement, that create engagement in the workplace. One is the nature of the work itself. And so when work is more interesting to us, when we have some degree of control over aspects of the work, and when there's a degree of variety in the work, that type of work tends to be more engaging, just inherently. The second bucket, which is really important for what we're talking about today, is interactions with others. And so things like, do you get supportive, actionable feedback from other people? So when you're talking to other people, do they help you figure out how to do your job more effectively in a supportive way? Do you have common goals and a shared sense of purpose with others? That definitely is a key factor in boosting engagement. And getting support, both emotional support and practical support from colleagues. So when you're stressed out, do your colleagues help you deal with that? When you are trying to solve a work problem, do your colleagues help you with that? These are really critical aspects of engagement. And then the last bucket, which is also very important for what we're talking about today, is leadership and supervision. So we know from lots of research that leaders, managers, supervisors play a critical role in engagement in organizations because our experience with engagement tends to be fairly local. It's the people we work with and interact with every day that really shape that. And so when leaders are responsive to what their employees need to be successful, when leaders are empowering, when leaders are supportive, this is something that's really important in increasing engagement. I do also want to mention burnout. There's been a lot of discussion of burnout lately and mental health challenges in the workplace, and we know since the pandemic, those have all gotten significantly worse. Of course, they were going up before the pandemic, but that really put a lot of pressure on people in the workplace. And engagement and burnout are different, but they are connected. And so when you build engagement, when you take action on some of these things that we're talking about today, you also reduce the risk of burnout, you reduce the risk of things like depression, anxiety, and so on in the workplace. So just wanted to make that connection. So when we look at engagement at the University of Minnesota, today we're focused on employee engagement, which is faculty and staff. But of course, to zoom out, engagement at the university also includes students and student engagement. So when our academic units, our colleges, our departments, our divisions are working on engagement and how to engage their faculty, staff, and students, they're looking at this whole picture. And the university does have a variety of tools and resources for the student engagement part. So for example, we have the employee engagement survey for faculty and staff. There's a survey called the Grad CERU and the CERU survey, which are surveys of undergraduate and graduate students and their experience here. And so these all fit together in terms of that bigger picture of engagement. I do want to share some timely kind of information. If you haven't read the Chronicle of Education this week, I would encourage you to do that. They have a special series of issues on the workplace in higher education and the state of the workforce. And they did a survey of faculty, staff, and administrators last October and November. And I'll just give you the article, one of them, there are several articles. One is titled, Higher Ed is Exhausted. And without going into a lot of details there, you can probably guess some of the things that they found. It does delineate some of the key stressors that are affecting faculty, staff, and students. They're probably not surprising if you read those, but I would say they've definitely been magnified and amplified since they did the survey in October, November. So I think this is a really good time to be talking about how we support our faculty and staff, especially. So supporting engagement is something that is woven into many of the programs and services that we offer. both within the Office of Human Resources, as well as we partner a lot with the Provost's office and deans and colleges in this. And so it's really about addressing engagement through a number of different channels. That's the most effective way to create a good workplace and address challenges as they come up. So we have a variety of leadership development programs that are aimed at helping to prepare academic and administrative leaders to be ready for future leadership roles and to strengthen their leadership skills and effectiveness, which of course is a critical piece of engagement. So a lot of those programs and that consultation and that work includes that. We have about 6,000 supervisors across the university. And so we have supervisor programs that help new supervisors as well as supervisors who are in role to build some of those foundational skills that are required to engage their teams, engage their departments, address issues as they come up. Talent development, there's a lot we could talk about there, but what that really gets at is employees looking for visibility, access, opportunity to grow their career, to understand what they can do to get more effective or do more interesting work or different kind of work. And so there's a variety of different tools and practices and so on that are going on around that. That's actually a key area of focus, and I think in a few months we'll be talking with all of you about some more of that work. There, just to give you an example, we're currently developing a course called Manager as Coach, which is designed to help those 6,000 supervisors to do or have the skills that they need to have those ongoing conversations with employees about performance and development to really support engagement. Strategic planning is something that helps. So if you remember, having common goals and a shared purpose is really important for engagement. So strategic planning work is absolutely pivotal in creating engagement and boosting engagement. And so there's a lot of work there, as well as the last part, which is I think what many of you are you're thinking about and wondering about, which is our employee engagement survey, which is just a tool. I think it's an important tool, but it's a tool that we use. It's our really one and only opportunity for all faculty and staff system-wide to provide confidential feedback on how things are going, what's going well, what needs some attention. So I want to just spend a couple of minutes giving you a little bit more info on the survey itself, and then we'll talk about some of the work happening in science and engineering, which is a terrific example of how to apply engagement within a college. So what you see on this slide is what the engagement survey measures. And these aren't survey items, but this shows you the factors that we know are important for engagement of faculty and staff here at the university. And so the survey allows for input on all of these things and reporting on this and action around this. So I want to give you just a brief snapshot of how we created the survey. So we've been doing the survey about 10 years now. And as I mentioned earlier, engagement is something that's well established in research. So the question wasn't what engagement is. The question was, how do we translate that to a higher ed, research one sort of institution so that survey items would make sense, right? So people reading the survey items would say, yeah, I know what that means, and I can give you input on that. So we did a number of things to develop the survey. One was reviewing the peer-reviewed research. The second was working with the Provost's office to put a faculty advisory committee together. And we had quite a few faculty who provided their expertise and their perspective on how do we write a survey that's going to resonate for faculty and measure things that are important for faculty here that are about engagement. We did a lot of interviews with deans, administrators, chancellors, others, to understand their perspective as well. And then, of course, we have a global consulting firm that's a partner in this. And so they have a lot of experience doing engagement survey work with organizations in all sorts of industries. So just to give you a sense for some of the things that went into developing the survey. And then this is just a snapshot of some of the high-level response rate, I guess, is what this is about from the last survey. And we are one of the few universities of this scope that does employee engagement surveys system-wide for faculty and staff. And I always want to brag about the response rate, which if you're in the private sector, that may not wow you, but in higher ed, a 74% response rate is pretty amazing. Our closest competitor is the University of Iowa. They do a survey kind of like ours, it's system-wide. They had a 63% response rate in 2024. And obviously response rate alone isn't, right? That's not the goal of the survey. But when we started this work, the previous survey that the university did called the Pulse survey had a 38% response rate. So we knew one of the things we needed to do was write a survey that people would respond to so that we could get broad input. And so that's been very successful. So this is system-wide data, right? And a lot of the story of engagement is more about what's happening at the local level, but just to give you an overview of some of this, this is 10 years of data for faculty on 3 of those key metrics that we measure: commitment and dedication, effective environment, and then intent to stay. And intent to stay is a survey question that we validated here. So what it means is that that is predictive of future turnover for faculty and staff. So it's something to pay attention to. If that survey item changes over time, that can tell you something about what might happen with turnover in the future. I will mention one of the things that there's a lot we could kind of dive into in terms of data, but I want to mention that for faculty, you can see during the pandemic, 2019 to 2021, there was a decline in commitment and dedication. So engagement did take a little bit of a hit during that time. The national data on faculty engagement would suggest we dropped less than a lot of organizations. And I would say that is due to a lot of efforts that were going on at the time to support faculty through a lot of the very difficult transitions that were happening. That being said, one of the themes that has come up a lot with faculty engagement is equitable distribution of workload and kind of that work environment piece. And so we have been partnering with the Faculty Consultative Committee and now Faculty and Academic Affairs to better understand where departments are doing well on that, what are they doing, where departments are struggling with that, how could they learn from some of those other practices that are more effective. So there's ongoing work there in terms of faculty. And then the last piece I want to just highlight quick is the data for staff. So this is the same kind of view for staff over 10 years. And I would say the highlight here, the big win, is if you look at that effective environment metric, 2013 to 2023, it went up 10 points, which of an organization of our size and complexity is actually pretty good. So a lot of times the challenge is how do we bring some of that to the faculty side, which can be more just more challenging for various reasons, which is part of why I'm very excited to have Deanna Lean here. So I'm going to turn it over to Deanna Lean to talk about some of the really great work in science and engineering. And I'll just real quick just say that one of the things that I really love about the work they're doing in science and engineering is it's an integrated and strategic approach to engagement. So it's not just a one and done kind of thing, but really looking holistically at engagement within college.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So, I'm super excited to be here talking to you all, Chair Gully, members of the committee, because in a knowledge industry, which is what we're in, the people are your most valuable asset. I know you hear that, but we definitely live that every day. And as Dr. Sullivan said, survey is great. It's an indicator. One of the other things we track within CSE is what I'd call sort of like an earlier leading indicator as to how things are changing over time. Do people, not do they just want to stay, but do they want to come? About 5 years ago, our success rate on the offers that we were giving out was about 50%. I think last year we're at about between 75 and 80%. So, not only is this someplace people want to stay, but like on the leading edge, people want to come and be. These are folks that have other options. Now, as Dr. Sullivan was saying, in CSE, we try and take a little bit of a holistic approach. And one of the things I want to focus on here, if you can see the slides, is an approach we took to building a deep and broad bench of leaders. It turns out leadership is important, as you well know. It matters. And in any given year, we're always looking for people to lead different initiatives, be it a department, be it a center, be a, whatever, a strategic plan. And what we determined was it was not very efficient to wait until you had the need and then go try find somebody to fit into that slot. It was much more efficient and effective to try and build in a systematic way. And so the other thing too, that's a bonus to this, it actually really helps with engagement, right? So it's like a twofer. You get your leadership bench and you get folks that are more engaged. Starting off at the bottom level, when folks first get here, there's sort of a 1 to 2 year onboarding period. This is when, and we hadn't done this before, we get all of the young faculty together that are coming at the same time, put them in a cohort. They learn about, what are teaching strategies, running a lab strategies, how to apply for funding strategies, how to do conflict management, blah, 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 right? And there's some other programs that we can sort of go outside with them for. And so they have a group that they can rely on. They're engaged because it's as a cohort. Now, as they go through, they go into the departments, they go to their individual sort of launch teams, mentorship programs within the departments, okay? They go off and get developed in the departments. As they go through the tenure process, come out the other side, right? Now we start engaging with them, a subset of them that showed some type of indication of proclivity for stepping forward and being interested in leading larger groups, not just their own individual research. And that's that. We're going to go into that a little bit in the next slide. An example of things that we're doing internally, this College Leads program. It's also, I like cohort experiences because then you can actually share experiences and learn together. And it's for young leaders across the college, usually, senior associate, junior full. And this is where we introduce them to the concept of leadership as a skill to develop. They're very good technically, but have they ever done a personality analysis on themselves? Have they ever figured out it's sort of a 360? Is this something that they would want to do? Okay, and their internal programs, I'll tell you about an internal program. There are also external programs. It's a little maroon box there. The Big Ten Academic Alliance Academic Leadership Program, and some others. From there, there's a subset of those now that sort of graduate, and we think, yes, they want to be leaders and they can be leaders. That's when we get more into the coaching, mentoring. We instituted a program. You can't just develop leaders and not have anything for them to lead. Right? So we developed this Dean's Fellows program where it's a 1 to 2 year, they are compensated for it, they have resources to target a particular issue within the college. And that issue, it could be a research issue, it could be I'll give you an example of one. There's 2-year colleges. Transfer students, our transfer student population had dropped. Why? What's the root cause? How do we fix it? How do we get more 2-year students into the 4-year? So that's a perfect thing for somebody to take a very, very specific look at, right? And Lisa Mill is one of the Dean's Fellows. She also happens to be in the College Leads program. That's actually about taking a look at that, and if you want to learn more about that, happy to go into her findings. Right. We'll also go ahead and then they have a mentor, a senior mentor, and we'll take them through that. Out of that now, you have a set of leaders that you can actually go ahead and use to address different problems in college. Now, when your department head openings are coming up, you know who you're going to go to. There's a center that needs to be led, you know who you're going to go to. And it is very, very sort of systematic, and people can see a progression path for themselves. Many of them say, I want to be a part of this. I missed this cohort. Can I be in the next one? It takes a fair bit of work, I will tell you that. But we think there's a good ROI. As an example of the fair bit of work, if we just look at this, the College Leads program, this is one I also, I think you're stronger together than you are separately. So we're doing this in collaboration with the College of Biological Sciences. And so there's 24, a dozen from College of Science and Engineering, a dozen from CBS, and Dean DeWalt's an awesome partner to work with, where it's a 1-year planned cohort strategy. It's 1 year that they're in the program. We spent 6 months setting it up, okay? Which is monthly meetings with people on Ken's staff. What we're doing is exploring multiple pathways of leadership. Not all leaders are the same. There's no archetype for leaders, right? You get to discover it yourself. The faculty are highly engaged, and so, for example, in the what a sample would look like in the yellow, gold, sorry, box. You're trying to understand what it means to lead a larger group of people. This is like a topic, okay? So why is leadership important? Leadership assessment, and we're trying to show them different styles, different ways to go about it, different collaboration techniques and different assessment techniques so they can figure out their strengths and weaknesses. So that's an example of some of the stuff that we do on the faculty side. And again, happy to go into it if you want. What do we do on the staff side as well, too? Similarly, we're trying to take a holistic approach to developing staff, okay? I'd mentioned, and I'm just giving one example here of the kinds of programs we're in. The same way we had that individual looking at how do we go ahead and address the dip in our two-year students. There's a group of 3 staff members, Beth Klugier and Flappman and Katie Sauer, who are taking a look at our staffing configuration within the college. They have a year to take a look at a meaningful issue. The one that they focused on, both because of their strength, also because it was an acute pain point, was on the finance piece. Okay, they had 4 initial recommendations. I can go through some of them a little bit if you wish, but the big picture was they figured we were not very resilient in the finance space. Okay, so how do you engineer resilience into an organization? How do you restructure an organization to make it more resilient? And that was the plan they put forward. 4 of the recommendations, they were all good. Some were more expensive than others. So the 2 that we had very good ROI on, which involved having 2 different streams in our finance group, and also a little bit of consolidation in shared services to cross train folks, are the 2 that we went forward with. And it seems to have had a very good effect. There's the volume coming out of the finance folks across the college seems to go lower. People are less stressed when somebody leaves a position if they're going to have capability. So it seems to be working. There was a separate group that went in doing things like this outside of finance. We have over 24 recommendations that we're working through. And again, happy to share more if you wish. But the upshot is it's systematic, it's holistic, and we are engineers and scientists, so it's kind of sort of methodical, and taking a look at the KPIs.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the presentation and the time that you put into this. Are there questions? Please, Regent Turner.
Thank you, Chair Gully. Thank you for your presentation. It's a good place to start. I first want to just address, just because it's kind of a nails on the chalkboard thing, when you use the term burnout. In my world, we use moral distress. I was a COVID ICU from the very beginning all the way through. To we nurses who are on the front line, it's like burnout kind of denotes that we weren't quite strong enough. But the moral distress that we saw on a daily basis, that describes that. I can't say what the academic profession went, but I know our teachers, our educators went through just as much. So just to point that out, that was, I had a hard time getting beyond that when you said that. So just so you know. My question as far as your training of supervisors, et cetera, do you have a way, I immediately tie it to my work world, and I often feel like people want to be supervisors, they just are like, they get the job because they filled out an application. Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be good supervisors, and I always feel like it's because they didn't have the training and they didn't have the resources. And you guys sound like you very active, that our university is very active in training supervisors. And do you have a way to kind of like assess how they end up being as supervisors? Do they learn skills so that they are like, oh, that's the boss I want to work under? Do you have a way to assess that? Because I wish the nursing profession had that.
So, yeah, Regent Turner, I apologize if I offended you with my use of the term burnout. I teach in the psychology department, and that's a term that's researched, and it's a standard term that's used. I didn't mean anything,
Right.
so I apologize if that came across that way. In terms of assessing supervisor performance, essentially, or sort of how well our supervisor's doing, that is something that is difficult to do sometimes here because we value more of the technical expertise and the technical skill rather than necessarily the supervisor or leadership or management skills. So while we do a lot to do training and to think about, I think there's especially opportunity in the selection process as we're looking at, sort of who's ready to be a leader and who would be a good fit for a leadership role, of differentiating between someone who maybe has great technical expertise, but maybe not the people leadership skills, and maybe isn't even interested in that. And so I think that, there's been a lot of discussion and work at the college level, I would say, and Dean Lean has given some great examples in one college of really trying to amplify and emphasize leadership skills. But I think that's an opportunity for us is to get beyond just the training piece, but also look at how do we recognize, reward good leadership, good management, those kinds of things.
President Cunningham.
Chair. Thank you, just that. Okay. It's just a prop. It's just a prop, that's right. Chair Gully, and presenters, I just wanted to say, first of all, I really enjoyed the presentation, and I have just been so impressed since I've gotten here about the ways that we're approaching professional development around our around a workforce. And these specific examples that you're doing in the College of Engineering, I didn't know before, but academia is traditionally terrible at this. We just graduate, we just put people, we let them, we're doing some projects, and then they get tenure and they have a bigger lab, and now they're responsible for millions of dollars and more staff. They've had no training on how to supervise staff. They have
the same problem.
absolutely none. And then we say, okay, you did that pretty okay for a while, so now you can partly run some part of a department. Won't tell you anything about that, give you any skills for it, do anything. So here's a whole pipeline plan for how to nurture leaders. And the other thing this does is it really allows all the people who may look differently in every possible way to be leaders, because it's drawing from a broad pipeline and programming and giving people the nurturing they need to see themselves as leaders in either group. So I'm sure there's more that can be done, and also, but it's a really impressive program. It is not typical across academia by any stretch. So I don't know how much is happening across the other schools, or how much we can roll it out more, or what can be done, but it's very impressive.
So it'd be great that President Cunningham, thank you very much. I think it'd be great to roll out across some of the other colleges. One of the things I would caution is that it does take resources and time.
Of course.
And investment of that. But I personally think it's a good ROI, because if you have a bad department head, it can cost you a lot. If you have an unethical center director, it can cost you a lot. I will say, if you ask, do others do this? So I sit on the board of the external board for Maryland, and they were, do not attribute this. They were very proud about some of their faculty development activities that they were doing in their College of Engineering, but it was shots, individual rifle shots. And then when I said, well, do you have something more systematic like this? You could just sort of see them go, no, oh. Can we get a copy of that? So I do think we are sort of a little bit at the forefront in something like this.
If I may, Chair Gully, the other part that I really like a lot is the cohort program at the beginning of the pipeline. Our faculty come in, they are not exactly sure how to be new faculty or how to have the support they need to learn best practices and to stay aligned and build the relationships they need. And so giving them that support, it's a tremendous retention component. It's also a tremendous way to keep faculty in the pipeline for tenure, and a wide variety of diverse faculty in a pipeline is to give them that cohort support, which allows them to realize everybody in their program is having the same problems they have. They're not isolated in what can be a stressful or early faculty career time. So again, very impressive.
Thank you. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Gully, and I'm just on the same bandwagon. So, and I come from the lens of having gone through career of higher ed and moving through the traditional career ladder, and a parent of two that are probably, I guess I'd put in that junior faculty mentoring. So my experiences and their experiences, this program is just so exciting because echoing, people are experts in their discipline, but they are not expert supervisors, managers, and they never had, many of them, never had any of that. And so to start early, and you're building this leadership cadre, whether they stay here or not. And I think they're more likely to stay because they're feeling valued and the whole engagement piece. But also I want to, I know it's expensive, but the external and internal mix, I think, is important to these kind of programs because you not only interact with your university colleagues, but then you're interacting nationally, and it is such a mix out there. And so I just want to add my voice to support of what you're doing.
Thank you very much, Member Davenport. One of the things I will say too, I don't like to lose any of my valuable faculty, but if one of my faculty goes off to run NIH, well, maybe that's not a good example.
Positions to be apparently today.
If they go off to be a dean at another institution, that kind of sort of looks good for us,
Yeah, it does.
you know?
It does.
So,
Thank you so much. Regent Hepsch?
Thank you, Regent Gully. First of all, I'm glad we beat Iowa. That's huge. Anytime we can say that in anything, I'm always happy. I'm a real believer in cohort programs and leadership programs because you really learn how to work with each other, other personalities or whatever. You know, I could never cheat my way to the nice side of the room on the Myers-Briggs test, no matter how hard I tried, because I'm just not the kinder, gentler type person that I want to be, but that's the way it is, you know, that's my personality. But my question is so people who want to, do you guys pick the people you want to be in the cohort, or can they volunteer and say, I want to become a leader, I want to be in this cohort? Or can anybody join it, or how does that work?
Regent Hepsch, thank you very much. That's a great question. And there are multiple cohorts in that ladder that
Yeah.
we showed. So the answer, like any good economist or engineer, it depends. The first one, the ladder, that is everybody that comes in that year.
That's it, okay.
That's all the young, and on average, it's gonna be somewhere in the 15 to 25, right?
Okay.
So everybody, level set at the same time.
Sure.
Okay, going into sort of like the, baby leadership, like
Yeah.
the college elites type thing, you have to apply. I'm not gonna force you to be a leader, right? You have to show some indication up front. But then you actually have to make your case as to why. And then myself and Dean DeWalt, again, just an incredibly valuable partner, she's great. We sit down and we actually look through, like, what's your motivation? What's your experience? What do you hope to get out of it? If this is like the fourth of many other types of things that you've already done, no, we'll save the spot for somebody else that might want to do it. All right, and so at that level, then it's going to be a little bit more about apply and be selected. At the Dean's Fellow level, that's really targeted.
Okay.
That's the tap on the shoulder. We notice you haven't really sort of stepped up to do something. We've got this project. We think you'd be ideal for it. What do you say? And try and sort of pull them in because we think this is one that we want to have on our bench. So it depends, depending on what level it's not really a pyramid, but that flow chart.
And I also can kind of chime in here too. Several years ago, when we started looking at how we can support academic leadership development, we met with quite a few of the deans to understand what are some of the challenges they're facing. And one of the things that we heard consistently is, I don't know who would be a great department head, who actually has the skills and the interest and would be successful. And so part of the initial College Leads program, when we started it several years ago, was really aimed at helping to identify faculty post-tenure who were kind of interested in leadership or where someone else saw some potential in them. But part of the program was to discern, is leadership something that they want to do? Because in many cases, hadn't really experienced what leadership really was about and what it really meant. So that's why it's important to have some of that assessment in there and kind of reality checking. But it is really kind of, you gotta, get an experience. What does that even mean to be a department chair? Because it isn't, I will tell you that in my experience, you could speak to this more than me probably, but from my observations and working with a lot of folks in those roles, becoming a department chair is one of the most jarring leadership experiences there. And I worked in the private sector for many years, and it's just such a jarring experience if you're not prepared, which is part of what's so wonderful about the work that Dean Alina is doing at CSE, is helping to ease that, I think.
Yeah, and you noticed there were fewer arrows as we went up. Because not every, and because even as you were saying, some people say they want to do, the one that we did, one of the Dean Fellows, where we tried to look at what does the AI picture look like? What should we be doing in our college strategically for AI? Catherine, after she went through the program, she said, I don't think I want to do this leadership thing. I think I just want to go back to my, and that's a win, right? She understands herself. She know thyself. She knows it a little bit better, and we won't, keep in her swim lane and keep doing the great work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Great answer.
Regent Tad Johnson. I guess we only have one Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Gilly. Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate it. I was kind of parachuted into academia in my 50s, so I came in as a department head, and it was a very unusual experience. But I was there to kind of help recreate a department, and it was unlike any other thing I'd experienced. I'd been executive directors of things. I'd been the head of a small federal agency. But anyway, one thing, I'm really glad I really like this idea of a cohort of upcoming leaders, because I was like, I'm not going to do this long term, you guys. I was there to direct a graduate program, and I didn't really want to do this but anyway, there was nobody else to do it. So I've seen people in different departments take over. They've only ever been in academia. And so if a new professor or a new, associate professor, assistant professor comes in, I've seen a new department head after 1 year say, you're not writing enough, you're not going to make it. And that review went up to the dean, who said, wait a second. And that person the new department head had no training at all. And it was just kind of like, you have to kind of learn how to teach people kindness, patience, mentoring, and stuff, some of us pick up in other parts of employment. But anyway, I also found that not everybody was meant to be a department head. In fact, there are just people that want to teach, research, write, and don't want anything to do with the paperwork stuff. And they're perfectly happy doing that. And it's kind of like, so there's usually one person who wants to do that. But if you can give them training like a year or two before they know they're going to take over that post, and they've got the support of the rest of the department and the department head and the dean, and figuring out who those people are. I think that type of training that you're suggesting would be excellent. And thanks.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. If I may add to that, I don't like having just one option. You said, you this person, you identify them, you train them. If I only have one option to choose for department head, my hands are as a dean, my hands are kind of sort of tied. I like to have multiple options. And that this, developing enough of these to have a bench, you can go down the bench and sort of figure out what is the right type of person for the organization at this particular point in time, right? It's like if you play sports, who are you going to sub in? And it's nice to have a deep enough bench that you have options. So I agree with you. I'll double down and say even more, so that we'll actually have some options to choose. I can go into detail where it's not a good situation if you actually don't have options. I'll hold off. If you want to hear sort of like, again, Leadership 101, why it's good, I'm happy to give my opinion on that one.
Thanks.
Thank you. Regent Wheeler.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Gully, and thank you very much for the presentation. Aline, I'll just underscore, leave it to the engineering department to develop a systemized way of leadership development to your point, and one that all can benefit, So my question's for Senior Director Sullivan, that's on the engagement surveys. So how do we translate what we find into really, actionable knowledge? So, that's, so you may find, on two levels. One is, do we have cohort comparisons? So can you compare college to college and see, like you probably see high engagement levels, maybe because of this leadership development, and that's something we should spread. So I'm wondering about comparisons, and then how do you get to the underneath the numbers information? I used to I read every comment that people submitted on engagement surveys because I'd find a lot of meat in the comments section. So I'd read thousands upon thousands of comments, and how do you turn that into knowledge that actually can make changes for the better?
Yeah, Regent Wheeler. I worked for a Fortune 50 that had 300,000 employees. We had about a 90% survey rate, and the response rate, and the head of HR said she read everything. She get on the plane with it. So, yeah, so those are really good questions, and there's a lot of stuff I could say, but I'll try to keep it concise. So a lot of the story behind engagement is at the college level, or is more kind of local. What is happening in terms of challenges they're facing, whether it's talent challenges or funding challenges or whatever. So the data is shared wherever there are at least 5 responses. So that means that several hundred academic and administrative leaders every time we do the survey get their data, and we provide support around how to take that data to have conversations, because it's just a survey. I mean, it's a survey, but it's just a survey, and it's a starting point for really having conversations around, okay, what's going well, what are things that we should prioritize for acting on, and then how do we translate that into some action. And so we support each college in doing that. Now, that being said, there are times where there are broader themes that come out. Like I gave the example for faculty, around workload distribution and equity around that, and that's something that there's department level practices that shape that, so it's not something we can kind of flip a switch and just fix, but it has led to discussions with faculty governance. We did some follow-up research to try to understand what was underlying that, and now the provost office is doing some piloting of some new approaches. So there's some things like that we're doing, and then on the staff side, there's a lot of work we're doing around sort of what I would call talent development, or helping staff, because one of the things we hear from staff consistently is, I want to understand better what my opportunities are here. If I want to grow, develop, do something different, how do I know where those opportunities are? Or if I'm a manager and I'm looking for some skills, probably exists at the university, but I might not know about it. So we're doing a lot of work I could go into detail on, but that will provide more tools and information and capability around some of those things. So is that?
Yeah. Just one quick follow-up. And are you able to compare so you can find best practices out there, so that you can, for example, with leadership development like that seems like one of the best practices we have out there. Are you able to compare within the university, across the university, and also with a few? It sounds like there's not as many doing it more broadly, but I'm just wondering, how you ascertain where the best practices lie.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we really try to do, is help identify what are some of those practices there can be sharing across colleges. And yeah, this one of the reasons why I was really excited actually for today and for Dean Aline to join me, because this is a great approach to leadership development and engagement, and we have had a lot of colleges doing work in this space. This is a great example of a comprehensive approach, and so we do try to kind of identify those and lift those up. We've done in the past, it's been a while, but we've done some panels where we've had deans and administrative leaders come together and share more broadly what they're doing, what's been working, what's been effective. When we all went remote, or most of us went remote, that it was harder to do panels and those kinds of things. But I think that's something that is really helpful, is kind of sharing. One of the things, I'll just end on this, one of the things that is challenging in just importing practices across colleges is each college is different in terms of some of the challenges, the culture, even at the department level, or how they're funded and some of the challenges around those things. And so it does have to be, I think, more of a sharing of information and thinking and learning and trying things out. In more of a hierarchical corporate setting, you could sort of say, we're all doing this, all 1,300 stores are gonna do this. But here, the contexts tend to vary. So that's why we're trying to, kind of get more, I guess, learning and sharing of best practices. So is that?
We are out of time, but I just would like to ask one quick question. If you can answer it in 30 seconds to 1 minute, I'd appreciate it. I just, first of all, I do want to echo what everyone has said about the incredible work that you're doing and how important it is, and how, in my experience at the university too, I've seen that faculty don't always get a lot of support when it comes to, it might be the understatement of the year, I can see on your face, but don't get a ton of support when it comes to leadership development or even learning to teach and learning to manage other people. So that is incredibly important, and thank you. One very quick question that I wanted to ask was, I loved hearing about this survey. Who is included on the survey? And you kind of mentioned it, but more importantly, who is not included on the survey in the university community?
Well, the survey is faculty and staff who are essentially benefits eligible. So that's the criteria. So I'm not sure if there are specific groups. There's a lot of different groups here,
Of course, yeah.
but that's who's included.
Okay, so anyone who's not benefits eligible isn't included on the survey?
That's right.
Correct.
Okay. And when you have people who serve multiple, roles, so for example, students who also work on campus, people who take advantage of the Regents scholarship and work, and are students also people who run centers but also teach classes, how do you qualify them? Is it case by case, or is it how they identify themselves, or?
I think if I understand your question right, everybody has essentially a primary appointment, and that is how it's determined. So there are cases where people work in multiple units, and they do in the system, they have one primary appointment. One of the things we do though, because there are times where that isn't as helpful, prior to survey launch, we work with all of the HR directors and all of the colleges, campuses, and units and look at the structure of their organizations as it is in the system, and then they can say, oh, that's fine, but we would like this group separate too, like centers are a great example. We have a lot of areas in the health sciences where there's different groupings that they would like to have the data reported on, even though in the system the reporting lines look different. We call that a shadow report, but that's something that we do every year or every time we do the survey, just to try to account for some of that as we can, yeah.
And do we ever, quick follow-up, do we ever survey people who are not benefits eligible?
Not on the employee engagement survey, yeah.
Do you know of any other tools that we use to survey people who are not benefits eligible?
Not in the context of this survey, Chair Gully. When we look at benefit eligibility, that probably covers about 20,000 of our employees. And in the other 8,000, that does include student and I believe graduate students, which there are other surveys that go to that experience.
Okay. For adjuncts and fixed-term faculty, nothing? If they're not benefits eligible? Not to put you on the spot, sorry, I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe
we
there
can
is, but
check
I
and
just
get
wonder.
back to you on that. That's interesting. I mean, we can check and look at the fine print and see who's involved.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you both being here. Thank you. For the next item, we are discussing labor relations at the university. So our presentation will highlight the work of our labor represented employees and how OHR's labor relations team connects with labor leaders. The aim today is to provide a foundation for future topics and engagement with union partners. And to present this item, let me welcome Vice President Horstman and Assistant Senior Director for Labor Relations, Coy Hillstead. And you can go ahead and begin.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Gully and members of the committee. We enjoy having this opportunity to present today. We hope to finish with plenty of time for questions and conversation on this important topic. Next slide. There we go. Our goal is to provide an overview of labor relations at the university, including a review of our labor represented workforce, an overview of how labor relations is structured, and highlights of the work of the employee and labor relations team. Next slide. In December of 2024, Associate Vice Provost Olagram and Senior Director Vang presented on the university's overall workforce, which consists of approximately 28,000 employees. The university is governed by the Minnesota Public Employment Labor Relations Act, known as PELRA. And this slide shows that labor represented employees make up 31% of our workforce currently. All labor represented employees have exclusive representation and are governed by collective bargaining agreements, or CBAs, which are approved by the Board of Regents. Changes to PELRA in the summer of 2024 have enabled non-labor represented employees, the 69%, to organize either in smaller groups than they could previously within their respective employee groups or with other employee groups. For example, P&A lecturers and teaching specialists, if they so chose, could organize as a unit without needing to include the entire P&A employee population. Next slide. This shows a breakdown of our labor represented workforce. Currently, the university has collective bargaining agreements with the following units: AFSCME Clerical, Healthcare and Technical, Teamsters, Law Enforcement, Crafts and Trades, Graduate Assistants, and faculty at Duluth and Crookston campuses. Labor represented employees work in a variety of roles across the institution in support of the university's mission. They work in administration, auxiliary services, law enforcement, instruction, research, healthcare, as well as diverse technical roles, just to name a few. Our largest union is composed of graduate assistants who are represented by Graduate Labor Union, United Electrical. The first contract, as you well know, between GLU UE and the university was recently approved by the board on January 21st, and I'm happy to say the first paycheck went without any complications, so that's always a good news too. You'll notice that the addition of the graduate assistants doubled our labor represented workforce, and as you can see, they are now our largest union. Our smallest group of labor represented employees are our law enforcement officers, represented by Law Enforcement Labor Services. Next slide, please. There are three objectives that we simply try to state as a university that we strive for in relationships with our labor represented groups. We want to support the culture, compliance, and collaboration that we bring together to manage the relationship well. In order to foster a culture of mutual respect, it is important to acknowledge that the union and management do have different roles and responsibilities. By nature of our roles, we may not always have the same priorities, nor will we always agree. However, it is important that we are able to discuss things openly and work towards finding mutual solutions. That effort builds trust over time. Enforcing collective bargaining agreements across the university system is a primary responsibility of the employee and labor relations team. It's essential that management respects and honors all labor contracts. We do work directly with union leaders to resolve any interpretation differences. To ensure compliance, we provide training and consulting to the HR community and supervisors, and proactively communicate new regulations when they go into effect. Collaboration with our union partners is an important aspect of what we do. We conduct labor management committee meetings with numerous unions across the system to discuss workplace issues, improve communications, and problem solve. Other examples of collaboration include working with the union to provide activist training of new union stewards, as well as establishing new employee orientation programs that meet the needs of both parties. Sometimes collaboration is less formal. The employee and labor relations team may get a phone call or email from a union steward or business agent regarding a concern, and they will informally meet and discuss it with unit HR and management of the area to address the concern as quickly as we can. Next slide, please. Just take a moment to share the employee and labor relations structure within our office. The human resources function at the university is distributed across the system. There are 33 unit HR teams, each that has a leader. And the central office of human resources is the connecting point for all these units. Unit HR teams can consist of one or more HR professionals. The size of the HR team depends on the campus, college, and unit. Some colleges may have one HR professional, like the College of Continuing and Professional Studies, while a large college like Liberal Arts may have a team of up to 9 HR professionals supporting their workforce. The role of unit HR is to work with employees on their campus, college, or unit, address their concerns, answer questions, and support their human resource needs. They're also responsible for ensuring compliance with labor contracts. Our office, the Employee and Labor Relations team, we have 9 HR professionals on our team, including Senior Director Vang, and they report to myself. Our overall focus is on managing relationships between the university and employees. We do this through interactions with senior leaders, unit HR, supervisors, union representatives, and sometimes individual employees directly. Our objective is to maintain a positive work environment, resolve conflicts, interpret policies and contracts, and ensure fair and consistent treatment of all employees across the institution. Due to the challenges of our distributed network of HR, effective labor relations does require great coordination and collaboration system-wide between our office and the units to be consistent. An example of this is the recent implementation of the new graduate assistant wages following ratification and approval. This project required us to update our HR systems, create new processes and job aids, and provide training. That training continues with faculty in this new employment environment. We then have partnered with the units to validate wages for every graduate assistant on their campus, college, or unit before wages were uploaded. That's just sort of a snapshot of the work involved to accomplish that implementation. Next slide, please. This shows some of the activities we engage in. Obviously, we negotiate all labor contracts on behalf of the university. We resolve disputes, including management grievances, managing grievances, and depending on the labor contract, we may possibly serve as a hearing officer, partner with the Office of General Counsel to interpret contracts and PELRA and ensure compliance across the institution. We often lead and help form labor management committee meetings and training, just to name a few of our focus areas. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Senior Labor Relations Consultant Coy Hillstead to walk us through the remainder of the presentation. Coy?
Thank you, Vice President Horstman and Chair Gully and Vice Chair Johnson and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this very important topic. I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the labor negotiation process. And as Vice President Horstman pointed out, Employee and Labor Relations does negotiate the collective bargaining agreements on behalf of the university. But it's important to note that we don't do that in isolation or in a vacuum. We do engage with stakeholders across the institution. And often on our bargaining teams, they are made up and represented by members of HR from various parts of the university and members of management. We prepare for negotiations by engaging with those stakeholders and having representation across the campuses, colleges, and units. And we also consult with senior leaders to determine financial resources. And those financial resources are based on the university's budget as approved by the Board of Regents. We also keep senior leaders informed of negotiations throughout the process. Now, the team that negotiates on behalf of the union is often composed of union leaders who may or may not be university employees, as well as employees from colleges, campuses, and units across the system. That said, it's important to note and to keep in mind that we are negotiating with employees of the university. And to that end, we work diligently towards a contract that both parties can, to the extent possible, feel is fair. And during negotiations, at times, there could be where either party feels that negotiations are at an impasse. And when that occurs, either party can file for mediation with the Bureau of Mediation Services, or BMS. And in those cases, a mediator is then assigned by BMS to essentially facilitate the negotiations process and help the parties reach a tentative agreement. And I would say that this is a common practice among public institutions, including with labor contracts in K-12 and in higher education. Now, once a tentative agreement is reached, it's important to note that the union must first ratify the contract before it's presented to the Board of Regents for approval. Now, with the implementation, whether that be a new contract or an existing contract, it's important to note that there are numerous steps involved in the implementation of those contracts. And that could include items such as updating HR systems, developing new processes and job aids, communicating those changes to HR supervisors and various departmental stakeholders, and additional training. I want to talk a bit about the processes we undertake in terms of dispute resolution. Even with the best of intentions, it's important to note that disagreements can still occur between labor represented employees and management. And when this happens, each collective bargaining agreement has its own grievance process and procedures, including who serves as the hearing officer at various steps in the process. Take, for example, our AFSCME contracts. They have 3 internal grievance steps, and if a grievance is not resolved through those steps, there's a 4th arbitration step. Now, as a general rule, we aim and strive to resolve those issues at the lowest possible level possible, working directly with employees, supervisors, union stewards, or business agents to try to resolve those conflicts before they would reach the point of arbitration. And there are times that the employer and union are unable to agree on a dispute that can't be resolved through the grievance process, and the union may then file for the grievance to go to arbitration. And when this occurs, our Office of General Counsel represents the university in the arbitration case. I also want to talk about the training and resources that we provide. And as has been noted, the university is a large and complex matrix system with numerous colleges and administrative units and 5 system campuses. And with that in mind, it's important that every supervisor and HR both understands and honors the rights of every labor represented employee. And to that end, our office in OHR conducts training and creates resources for HR and supervisors to ensure consistency in both how the contracts are interpreted and applied. And some examples of our training include changes to the CBAs following negotiations or when there's a new contract. For example, the recently implemented graduate assistant contract with United Electrical. In that case, we provided training to various stakeholders on the provisions of the new CBA, and we do that with changes to existing contracts as well. We also ensure that HR and supervisors understand their roles and responsibilities in conducting grievance hearings, because both HR and supervisors often have a role throughout those grievance steps. And then when there are new regulations that impact the area of employee and labor relations, we provide training and resources on those as well. And you could take, for example, in the summer of 2023, there was a new law that went into effect that allowed new employees 30 minutes of paid time with their union representatives during new employee orientation. And that took effort on our part to train and put together resources so that HR and supervisors were aware of those new regulations. And I would say that's also an example of an area that we have ongoing dialogue and meeting with unions if they have concerns that they want to raise in that particular area. Now, we have some profiles that we wanted to spotlight here of some of our labor represented personnel. The work of our labor represented employees supports the university's teaching, research, and outreach mission in a number of ways. So, for example, to illustrate this, we're sharing a profile of an AFSCME clerical employee, Emily Oberville, who is a principal office and administrative specialist within University Services. Emily began working at the U in 2013 in U Market Services and moved to the Facilities Management Central Order Desk. She shared a quote here, as you see on the slide, about what she likes about her work, which keeps her busy, engaged, and learning from expert carpenters, electricians, plumbers, and custodians. Working at the university runs in the family, and Emily followed in the footsteps of her mother and sister. Another profile that we have here is from Assistant Professor Katie Kask at the University of Minnesota Duluth. And Assistant Professor Kask is represented by University Education Association, or UEA. Professor Kask began at UMD as an adjunct and recently became a full-time faculty member. With a teaching focus on evidence-based practice, Professor Kask focuses on the application of research in rehabilitation treatment. So that provides a summary of some of the profiles of our labor represented employees. Chair Gully and members of the committee, this concludes our presentation, but we welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you so much.
She was first.
Oh. Regent Turner, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Gully. So we've heard wonderful things, the past presentation about training programs for supervisors, et cetera. Sounds like our HR department has some kind of training too for supervisors kind of thing, right?
Yep.
So what happens when you've got a department that is run by a consulting firm? I want to say the food service. And so now you've got an outside entity coming in, and how much control do we have over making sure that those supervisors, et cetera, adhere to our standards, if we have them, you know, as far as, because I'll be frank that that particular department being run by that outside, I'm not impressed. Is this being recorded? No, I'm serious. I'm not impressed with the fact that it used to be it used to be run by the university. And so how does that work when you're working with a consulting firm? And how many other departments do we have that are run by an outside consultant firm?
Well, in our environment, Regent Turner, I couldn't speak to the number. That's probably something we could research and get back to you on of different examples of this. But our dining services, we do have a contract with Chartwell to manage the dining halls, and they do give work direction to our employees and supervise them. We have conversations with Chartwells about issues that occur as well as follow-up, and I know Vice President Alice Roberts Davis spends a lot of time speaking with them about the culture here and how we set expectations for working with our employees. We are aware of disagreements that occur there, and we are addressing them actively. And we do have an ongoing LMC with the Teamsters where this comes up frequently. So we are discussing it. The contract was put in place several years ago. I believe we moved from Sodexo to Chartwell at that time. And so I'm not completely familiar with the history prior to that. But, you know, we Chartwell has their own supervisor training program, so we haven't gone there with that group. But that probably is something we could explore. Do you have anything to add, Coy?
Well, I would just reinforce that our contact with the labor union that represents those employees, our contact with them is direct with the union. They're employees of the university. You're correct, the supervisors are a third-party entity, but we frequently engage with the Teamsters union on issues directly related to the employees of dining services.
Right, follow up?
Of course.
And I appreciate that. That's not my issue. What, I would love it if you would, you got the consultant in, and do they have the freedom to bring in their own program, because you've now signed a contract with them. But I would love to know what kind of things they expect out of their supervisors, what kind of training and do we have the right to find that out?
Well, I think it's germane to our operation, and we certainly can look at that detail and provide it to you. I mean, if we review that with them as well, this is part of our work environment, so that would be something we would have available.
Because a just, compassionate supervisor is a happy department.
Yes. And there are, I will say, different perspectives when we get into the issues that arise, so.
Thank you, Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Gully, and thank you, Vice President and Senior Director. Very interesting presentation. Can you go back to I don't know if you can back up to the slides on the dispute resolution part?
Yeah.
There were 3 parts to it. Yeah, so when you get to, I'm just curious who does the informal dispute resolution and the grievance process, and then is there like a formal arbitration process that's binding, or how does that work? Just
Yeah.
a process question.
Yeah, so each of these steps vary a bit depending on the collective bargaining agreement, so there's some variability. The first phase, the problem solving, some of our contracts have this specific terminology used, and it's a more formal process in terms of a certain number of days upon request, the parties have to meet and convene and work through that. Our office in Employee and Labor Relations is often involved in those directly with the unit HR, the employee, and the union. So there's an effort to resolve those at that level. And often, I can tell you that often we can resolve issues before it has to go to that next phase of becoming a grievance. But there are times where just the parties either don't agree or can't come to a resolution, becomes a formal grievance. There are anywhere between 2 and 3 typically, depending on the contract grievance steps. So there's often a different person hearing the grievance at different steps and making a determination. And if that can't resolve the grievance, if it's still an active grievance, there's a binding arbitration process. Yeah.
American Arbitration Association. So
I would have to ask probably our general counsel about specifically, but yes, there's an arbitration process defined in the CBA and the parties agree that that's a binding arbitration, and there's specific provisions about the arbitration in each contract.
I think under that, the next step is court.
Yeah,
If you're going through that association.
yeah, in terms of appealing, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Regent Davenport,
I'm good, I'll pass.
other questions?
Chair Gurley, I would just like to acknowledge the team for the tremendous work they did for the graduate union in a really, really short amount of time. Our graduate students put a lot of work into that, and I know there were hundreds of hours of back office work that needed to be done, and you guys really pushed to get that done by January, which I really think demonstrates the commitment we have to all of our bargaining groups, but certainly to getting something new up and going. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Madam President.
Yeah, and just, I would like to echo that while we have a moment, that that was a tremendous amount of work for a short amount of time, and the fact that the first payroll went off without, went well, and you said there were no issues, so I totally believe that, but I'll reserve just the fact that like even getting it stood up in that amount of time was really tremendous. So thank you, and I'm really excited to have the first contract underway for the graduate students. So
Yeah, it's a new world, and I think there's still learning to be done, but we will support that.
of course, thank you. If there are no further questions, we'll move on to our last item. So our last item is just some informational items from Vice President Forsman.
Yes, Chair Gully, Vice Chair Johnson, this is simply the requested status list of current contracts the university is engaged in and their effective dates. A couple of comments since the last time. Graduate assistants have been added to it. I will also note as we go forward this year that the three AFSCME contracts, healthcare, clerical, and office and technical, have merged, so they will be negotiating under one contract, which will occur in the first half of this year. We're about to start negotiations. We're also about to start negotiations with Teamsters, and looking forward to that. So those are getting started a little earlier in the year than what we have done historically, and I think both sides have really put some effort into making that happen. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but this is the current state of affairs.
Questions? Okay. There being no additional business before the special committee, we stand adjourned.